Today we're going to be talking about racism, intergenerational trauma, the impact on mental health, and how that can show up in the body and the brain. We're also going to talk about strategies that can lift up mental health, that can combat toxic stress, and that can give us some ideas in the social impact investing community to maybe focus on that have ROIs that you might not have thought about. I'm honored to share this stage with a prolific panel. It's a deep bench of innovators, thought leaders, people that have social justice and equity to the core. And so, let's welcome our first panelist, the legendary Chuck D. Frontman of Public Enemy, guardian of hip hop, the genre, activist, artist. Let's keep clapping, keep clapping. Activist, artist, producer, radio host, innovator. We can just keep going on and on. And social justice warrior. Thank you for being here, Chuck.
You're boring me with myself.
Our next esteemed panelist is Jimmie Briggs. And Jimmie Briggs is principal of the Skoll Foundation, the Justice and Equity Portfolio. Jimmie is an author, a journalist, an incredible writer. And, there's another writer that once said, "Those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by those who are doing it." And Jimmie embodies those incredible words by James Baldwin in what he does every single day. And certainly, last but not least, Dr. Olajide Williams. Come on out. And I will be calling Dr. Williams Jide. Give you a little. And Jide is the Vice Dean of Community Health at Columbia University in New York City. He's a professor of neurology. He is a world-renowned health disparities researcher. He's also the founder of an organization near and dear to my heart that I have the pleasure of being executive director and CEO of, Hip Hop Public Health. And Jide co-founded that organization with another guardian of the genre, Doug E. Fresh, and so sometimes his other title is the hip hop doc, at any rate. So, but seriously, so we are gonna just get right into it. Jide, set the stage for us. Talk about what do we see in terms of our health? How does racism, how does intergenerational trauma show up in the body and in the brain?
So thanks for that question, Lori. I'm really excited to be here at SOCAP with these two incredible gentlemen. Unfortunately, we're going to be talking about something that is really quite, it's a topic that is really a tragedy in this day and age, 21st century America, to still be talking about this is real tragedy. But I think what I would like to just highlight is that, trauma and as a consequence of racism has far-reaching effects that are not just cognitive, not just physical, not just even emotional, but and intergenerational, but it has effects that transcend one individual and can be propagated from one generation to another generation. One of the most tragic things about racism, for me, it's the epigenetic consequences of racism, the fact that genes can be modified by the effects of racism, and these genes can give rise to these risk to risk for disease. We call it an epigenetic phenomenon where you can turn on or turn off a gene. And some of these genes can be genes associated with cancer, genes associated with diabetes. And we've seen that in some of the work that we've been doing at Columbia. And these epigenetic effects of racism don't only affect the individual, but it can also be passed down from mother to child. So my experience of racism and the epigenetic phenomena that's occurring in my DNA could have been inherited from a parent or a grandparent along the line. So that's just the cumulative disadvantage that occurs as a result of racism cannot be looked at cross-sectionally. It has to be looked at longitudinally.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about like the physiological changes that happen in the brain?
Yeah, so you get structural changes, physical volumetric changes in the brain. We know that brains that are young children, infants' brains that have been exposed to trauma they're actually smaller in key areas. So there's an area called the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the frontal lobe we use for abstraction, for judgment, for thinking, and for reasoning. And that's actually smaller volumetrically in the brains of children whose mothers have experienced racism, and also in the brains of children who are suffering from deprivation. We also know that there's another area, Lori, called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the part of our brain that's responsible for emotional regulation, how we regulate our emotions to external and internal stimuli. And the amygdala is also volumetrically smaller in the brains of deprived, impoverished children or children that have been traumatized, or the intergenerational effects that are passed down from the mother to the child and the conditions that the child grows up in. The third area of the brain is an area called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is an area that's actually affected in people with Alzheimer's disease. The hippocampus is the first part of the brain to start to shrink in Alzheimer's disease. And this part of the brain is affected by trauma. It's volumetrically smaller in the brains of those children who have been traumatized, similar to the shrinkage that you see with Alzheimer's disease. So the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus are all affected by trauma, including the type of trauma we see with racism. But it's not all doom and gloom. Mm-hmm. These brains do recover, and the antidote and what catalyzes their recovery is so simple. It's almost miraculous. It's nurturing. Nurturing. Nurture that child. Within 6 months, you'll start seeing reversal of these changes.
You know, we're talking about racism, but we could be talking about a lot of isms. Chuck, you talk about isms all the time, right? Sexism, ableism, you know. 35 years ago, you wrote the anthem, Fight the Power. Anyone know about that out here? You wrote that 35 years ago, and yet it could have been something you just wrote like last week, right? Relevant. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis behind that and behind the way you've been using your music and your artwork to really help educate around the oppression and the isms?
Well, the isms are like a stain in your pocket. And people come and go. They're born and they die over a span of time. So that's why isms have to be eradicated. But in the 1980s, that was the decade of R&B. That was Reagan and Bush in the United States. It was very important to be aware. The cheapest price to pay is attention. Mm-hmm. So you had to pay attention to what was happening in front of your eyes and ears on real time. But at the same time, you had to pay attention to scholarship. Mm-hmm. People had tenure in scholarship that really did research and real things that led up to information that you can hold on to. So, yeah, I wrote Fight the Power for the Do the Right Thing soundtrack in 1989 for Spike Lee, which talked about situations that were bordered on racist policies and unfairness and imbalances in New York City in the movie, but also represented not only in the United States, but around the parts of the world dealing with it. But more importantly, what's underspoken for, the year before that, I wrote Don't Believe the Hype. And Don't Believe the Hype was basically off of the theories of like Noam Chomsky that's saying that there's going to be an area of misinformation out there that's going to come through new technologies that will distort what we think is equal and fair and whatever. So Fight the Power is one of those things that dealt with the core of racism of let's say the primitive, you look different from me based on the characteristics of your skin and your background and where you come from. So therefore, I'm going to oppose anything that comes out of you because I'm superior and you're inferior based on how I'm taught. But that was when people could actually listen with their ears to try to break it down and figure out, I'm listening with my ears, I'm seeing with my eyes, and this is wrong. Fast forward into right now, which we'll talk about even later on, where it's such a different time, where the racism has actually seeded itself in a whole bunch of futuristic methods that have led to uncertainty, mental health, despair, confusion, and disorientation right up into where we're talking about right now, how to grab the things around us to come up with a solution that's something to answer something so rampant at this time where, yes, it's seeded in the isms, but it's sprouted into something else. And what it's sprouted into the disease of something else that's now deeply routed into our systems. So I am very happy to be able to talk about how we can come about answering some of this with a solution when a lot of this is also the problems being created as we speak under our own watch. So it goes deep, and that's why, and just to give you a short story, through music, I was reached in contact by Easy A.D. of the Cold Crush Brothers and my good friend Dougie Fresh to meet with this man who met with me, who said that the gift of music, art, and culture can be a possible antidote and solution to offset what's out there in society that's rooted in racism and all the other isms. And music and culture and art is that thing that sets you free. And this is 10 to 12 years ago. But this is 10 to 12 years ago in a 17-year period that we've seen the advent of the smartphone. And we'll talk about that later on because we've seen changes from the beginning when we talked about, okay, it's about music, art, and culture. We can actually come across with something culturally to actually make somebody look at it differently and go about it, and to a point in 2025 where it's hella way more complex, just to give you a little bit of Bay Area speak on the hella.
I want to get back to what you said about attention. We're definitely going to dive into music, art, and culture and the antidote. Thank you for that, Chuck. I want to bring Jimmie into the conversation a little bit. Jimmie, you talk extensively in your writing about proximity, and I think this gets to a lot of the concepts that Chuck started talking about. And in your work in philanthropy at the Skoll Foundation, you talk about keeping the streets in the room, like having that representation. Can you talk a little bit more about like what's behind that and how that drives the work in the justice and equity work that you do?
Sure. Thank you so much, Lori. First of all, if I may, I just want to acknowledge and thank Michelle and Hughes and Fabian and the SOCAP team who allowed us to be here. Really want to honor the opportunity and grace they've given us for this conversation. I think to your question, keeping the streets in the room, proximity, authenticity. In the past nearly 5 years, almost 5 years, since the events of 2020 and the death of George Floyd and what followed, what came before, it's even more important, I think, and the Skoll Foundation and leadership have endorsed and supported this, to really center the voices of those who are at the forefront of the challenges, who are working the front lines, so to speak, to catalyze systemic change, enduring systemic change innovatively. And when you talk about issues of justice and equity, you have to have those communities who have been the most historically disenfranchised, excluded. Their voices have to fuel, have to inform the conversations, even when those voices aren't in the room with you. Proximity, I think, throughout the school, every portfolio system we have, proximity, authenticity, trust-based relationships with our partners, regular conversation,
Yes.
personal engagement is critical. And for me, when I, maybe we'll talk about this later, but when I personally discovered hip hop public health and what you and Jide were doing, and
Well, that was my next question.
okay, I won't go to that
So,
point
Jimmie,
yet.
how did you discover hip hop? No.
Yeah, okay, I'm
Tell-
joking, yeah, sorry.
it's an interesting. I think this is
Yeah.
a really interesting origin
Yeah.
story on both sides of the street, and
Sure.
I'm really curious for you to share how you kind of came about the organization, but also what was it that drew you into the work?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Lori, because I was not long at the Skoll Foundation, and in transparency, this is working at Skoll was my entry point into philanthropy. I mean, previously, as you noted, I was a full-time journalist, I'm a writer, and so it was actually not long into my tenure at the Skoll Foundation. I just happened to be watching Joy Reid on MSNBC, and she was talking about hip hop public health, and you and Jide were on there, and I'm like, wow, this is different.
Dougie was on with me.
The Dougie was on. That's right. Doug was on. Dougie was on with you. Jide. That's right. And you were all talking about HHPH's response to the then escalating COVID-19 pandemic.
Yep.
Putting out videos and curricula programming to get people to wash their hands, to get tested for COVID, to wear a mask. And it just struck me on a personal level initially because, someone who grew up in hip hop and obviously being a huge fan of Chuck and PE and so many others of that time and before, I just intuitively recognized the inherent power of not just the culture, but of the music and the ambassadors to reach people where they were, to reach, to really transform behaviors and mindsets in a way that, traditional messaging, public health messaging at that time was not doing. And I think, what Chuck was saying, hip hop, for me, again, personal was always community. Hip hop was how, I turned to hip hop to understand what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be masculine, and to build community. And in this case, seeing how you are using hip hop, it just struck me that this is something that had to be supported, had to be invested in, and thankfully, the Skoll Foundation and the executive team agreed on that.
Did you have any hurdles in that work when you started talking about an organization called Hip Hop Public Health? I know Jide has had some hurdles with the title sometimes. Yeah.
No, I think, in transparency, I don't think there were hurdles at Skoll. I mean, it was more of explaining, it was new, for the foundation, and probably, as we talked before, for philanthropy, to invest in something, first of all, that had hip hop in it, in the name itself. I think that was a barrier, not for Skoll, but just in general. People taking it seriously. I'm sure you all address this all the time from funders, potential funders, that somehow hip hop is strictly entertainment. Make people dance and laugh and nod their heads. But the four of us on the stage, I'm sure many in the audience understand that hip hop has always been more than that. It was always been of substance, and it's always been in a tradition of transformation and evolution, impact.
Yep.
And I think in explaining that, making that case within Skoll, there wasn't a barrier. But I know, and you and Jide can talk about this much more eloquently than I can, people see Chuck up here and his music in PE, and think, oh, this is entertainment, this is something that, for the radio. It is, but it's far more than that. And I think my hope is that, by you all being here on this stage and at this convening, more people understand that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jimmie. Jide, maybe you want to say a little bit about some of the challenges that you've experienced throughout the years.
Well, I think, I'm a professor of neurology, right? And I go to my chairman and I say, I want to develop programs with hip hop to fight stroke. You can imagine the type of look that I got, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, what did you say? You want to do what? I said, so tell me more about this. Well, so I went on and on about it. And he sat me down. He said, Jide, you're a great guy, but I'm not sure you're going to make tenure if you pursue this path. And, but stubborn as I am, I pursued it anyway. And, and I realized that this was going to be a pattern. If my own chairman who knew me, believed in me, and had supported me in my career had such doubt about the power of this direction, imagine someone who doesn't know me, how that person is going to react. Right. So what I did was I decided that I was going to have to exceed the burden of proof. And that led me to designing a randomized control studies, began with some pilot studies, did enough pilot studies, got enough data to apply for a large NIH grant, got the NIH grant to run a very, very large randomized controlled trial using hip-hop and an attentional control for a specific behavior related to stroke. And then we published those results because the results were wildly positive. I was asked to speak all over the country about the results. And one thing led to another, and I started running more and more randomized controlled trials. And so when the data, the body of evidence was robust enough, that's when I started, we started the organization, and I started approaching non-academic entities, because I wasn't doing research anymore. Research was done. I was now looking for support to scale this work into the communities that needed it the most. And it was interesting. I mean, Jimmie's response was actually, and there have been some organizations that have been very supportive of us at Hip Hop Public Health, but the majority of organizations we approached pre-George Floyd was no, 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 no. I showed the data, I showed the comparative effectiveness data. Okay, if you are funding this, and this is the effect size and the impact, this is the effect size and the impact of what we're doing, but there was still multiple no's. And that was because people just weren't comfortable with the idea of using hip-hop as a therapeutic intervention in public health.
I mean, we did a project with a particular company that when the press release was going to go out, they didn't want us to use our name. They wanted us to call ourselves HH Public Health in the press release. We're like,
but the good news is, and there is good news, the good news is I think that, I think the last few years of COVID has done something to the psyche of not just those of us in public health, but those of us in sectors that are completely unrelated to health, and sensitize folks to the concept that we are all in this together. Right. And I think that is what is winning. That is what has been winning in our world. Our ability to kind of make incremental change in the streets.
Yeah. Well, and the other part of the story that Jimmie didn't share with you is that he wrote a cold email to info@hhph.org, and thank goodness we check that. It's like this principal from the Skoll Foundation just happened to see, the COVID literacy resources on MSNBC and would like to talk. Like, who does that? Like, is this spam? Is this real? And now we've, become such a wonderful, it's been such a beautiful friendship, partnership, collaboration, and answer those info emails if you have that. I don't know if any of you know the movie, do you remember when you fell in love with hip hop? Anyone know what that movie is? Brown Sugar? Okay. Anyway, I remember the time when I fell in love with hip hop public health. We met I don't know if you know this story, Chuck. I met Jide literally on the radio. It was 2010. I was running the then Office of School Wellness Programs, which is essentially health and physical education for all of New York City public schools under the Bloomberg administration. It's like 1.1 million kids, 3,000 to 4,000 health and phys ed teachers. And we were both invited to talk about what was going on with childhood obesity. And Hip Hop Public Health had just been doing some work. And I was just hired in this big new position that I was an office of one for like 1,600 schools. It was crazy. But we were talking about all the new initiatives, and we met literally on the radio. And after that, I was like, who is this guy? This is so interesting. And he was like, who is this person? So, I joined the advisory board, and, we would meet like here and there once or twice a year. And just the work, what I loved, and I get to be sort of a moderator, panelist a little bit here and bring a bit of the education perspective. For me, it was a paradigm shift. For me, it was about looking at health education, which was so important and so non-existent in schools, and making it fun, engaging, and the attention that you talked about earlier. It's getting that attention, and also, doing this methodology that blended music and culture and art with science and the neuroscience of learning. And so I was like, this is incredible. And then to be able to ultimately, work with the team and join as, the work grew from New York City and beyond. Chuck, could you talk a little more about attention? And Jide, maybe you share a little bit about, the actual neuroscientific properties within the approach and maybe how that could be applied in other areas when it comes to attention.
Number one is the breakdown. Hip-hop public health is really not one term or one name. It breaks down into hip-hop, a cultural demographic in its start. Then you have public, what is the public? And then 3, what is health? And it has to synonymously get a conversation across really quick and the speed of a beat or music that people feel, and people have to be able to feel its attributes. Hip hop might be jarring at first to those on the outside of being properly informed because they might be in their cubicle and in their particular world, but just like jazz would have been in 1910 and just like rock and roll would have been in 1960, it's going to be jarring, but people come and go and new generations evolve. Yet you still have to have a purpose and a definition of who you are and what you're out to do. And hip hop, public health, dealt with all 3 situations, as this is a defined demographic that will grow in time. I've been to 120 countries because of hip hop. So obviously public just does not mean one country. Yep. It means the entire world, because they're on a vibration of music, art, and culture that has them looking at it as a lightning rod. What you put in that pipeline is going to be beneficial, or might go the other way if you don't actually manage that. So hip hop public health, when I was approached with this, it was arresting of do we have corporations that sell music to people in the name of hip hop that have the end narrative of being whatever it gotta be to sell them product? Or does it steer back to the educational area where it has to be supported, and the educational aspect of it is the beginning of information. And if it's the beginning of information of what it is and defining the who, what, where, how, and whatever of a people attached to it on something that's going to address a condition in our society, that's what my involvement was with this organization, to be able to create and make change. And it was an easy fit, and that was the struggle, to pull it away from what already is going to say, this is what this culture is. It's a money-making thing for a machine, or is it something you put in education that will sprout trees for generations to come, that will also enhance our health, will also inform our public,
Yes.
and make them clear about it, and also say that the arts and culture are good.
Yes. Amen.
Yeah.
Jide, when we first started talking, I feel like we need to clap for that. Do we need to clap for that? Yeah, I think so. It's just floating in my mind there. You know, when we first started talking about the work and thinking about the attention of it, you talked a lot about the research you did in the fields of advertising and marketing, and then how you kind of looked through those lenses to think about, you know, this paradigm shift. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Attention has been described as one of the most sought after commodity in modern times, right? It's a highly competitive trade, attention. And just going back to our brains and the neuroscientific aspects, music is primal. It's powerful. It's potentiating. There's a reason why music has such powerful effects over all of us individually, right? It can lift us up, motivate us, inspire us. It can calm us when we're stressed. It can even, make us laugh, make us cry. It just has such diverse emotional responses that we all have to music. More than any other stimulus that's out there, by the way.
Yes.
And the reason is because music occupies so much real estate in our brains. People don't realize that music occupies twice as much real estate in our brains than language itself, right? Language is usually occupied in one hemisphere. Music is bihemispheric. It's in multiple locations, and it's almost ubiquitous in our brain. And why? Why are we designed with all this music real estate in our brains? Well, one reason is because one effect of it is all the individual feelings and reactions that we all have to music. But the other important thing in music is the educational properties that we haven't fully leveraged in music.
Yes.
We know that music can help us learn. We know that. Many of us learn through music. Children learn their ABCs through music. We know that music can really help us remember stuff, right? It affects our memories, our retention. You can probably remember the chorus of a song you heard once, 20 years ago, than a book you read 10 times, right?
Yeah.
It has that much power on our memory and our retention. But it has even more power than those factors. It can help us heal. I use music to help my stroke patients speak again. It's called melodic intonation therapy. I use music to help my patients with agitated delirium to calm down. I could prescribe an antipsychotic, I can put them in a 4-point restraint, or I can simply prescribe music to calm them down from that delirious state. So it has these incredible properties. Recently, the NIH director, Francis Collins, was on TV, I saw, talking about how the NIH is now investing heavily in music medicine, trying to understand the mechanisms behind music's power over our brains and music's ability to heal us. And so now if you go to the NIH's website and you pull up all the RFPs, you'll see so many requests for proposals around music medicine.
Yeah, the arts on prescription.
Music medicine. And so the role of music is, hip hop music in particular has been referred to as a psychiatrist of the streets. Why? Right? Why does music have these cathartic properties? Why is it that folks, kids in the crisis text line recently reported, right, that one of the things that young people ran to in the times of crisis during COVID was music.
Yep.
Because music has these healing properties. And so at Hip Hop Public Health, what we're really trying to do is not invent anything new, but leverage what has always been there. And what has always been there is this power of music. And how do we bring that power, harness it within the public health space in a way that can actually affect change?
Yes, yes. The report that Jide was talking about from Crisis Text Line, which is probably the largest organization in terms of reach for those that are in crisis and can actually text with someone who's culturally relevant. Over 1 million young people were surveyed with their permission, and their conversations were analyzed, and the #1 coping mechanism that they shared was music, right? Was listening to music, singing, participating in music. And then there was another report that asked young people during the pandemic, how did they manage stress? How did they cope with severe stressful situations? Music was #1, but what was in the top 10? Anybody want to guess? Exercise, dance, creative writing, spending time with friends. All of these areas that young people are actually telling us we need more of, the things that get cut the first in school systems and community-based programs, these are the things that have the evidence that are not just good for art's sake, for music's sake, for visual art's sake, for dance sake, but for also the healing properties. Jimmie, could you talk a lot about music's global impact and sort of the way it can be so widely universal. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and this is when we had our initial partnership established, but also I think since then, as you know, Lori, I mean, seeing it firsthand, Hip Hop Public Health was on the main stage at the Skoll Forum last year, 2023. Dale DMC was on the panel with Jide and one of our board members, Cheryl Dorsey from Echoing Grain. But we also had artists from Colombia,
Ali, aka Mind,
Sister Fa from Senegal, and then after the panel, you all were, they were in a cipher, rapping and exchanging lyrics in their respective languages. I think that it was something I understood, and I think many of us understand the global footprint of hip hop culture and the music in particular. But to see it unfold in that way, trading lyrics, very freely, organically.
In 3 separate languages.
Yeah, exactly, and a very positive messaging. But then, I think for me at the outset of our grant partnership, understanding that you all. There was a particular focus on the Black and Latino community in this country, but it's much more than that. Yeah. You're working with indigenous communities. I know that, just recently, you can correct my dates, you're now working with Pacific Islanders in Hawaii, the Asian American community. Recently, Jide took HHPH and the model to Mumbai, to India. I mean, as Chuck said, hip hop's taken him to the majority of countries around the world. And I think, for me, with my philanthropic hat on, I think there's a lot more scale to unfold with this framework and with this potential hit for hip hop. It's ubiquitous. It's a global phenomenon, probably one of the few global cultural phenomena right now in the world. And I think just given the public health risks that communities around the world are facing, particularly those who are most vulnerable, the potential for impact and transformation is limitless in many ways.
Yeah. And when you think about the current crises that so many of us are dealing with, so many of our young people, mental health, right? And we have some tools, some of it not very expensive. Some of it is just so connected to culture and universally approachable. You know, for us to think about, and for everyone here in the audience and the roles that you're in, whether you're an investor, whether you're thinking about that next big thing, what are the areas that you might be able to support and infuse elements of innovation, you know, into your strategies? So, Chuck.
Yeah. I just like to say you need tools and the proper teachings to keep up with the speed of time. And right now, music is not what it was 15 years ago. Maybe 25 years ago, you know, music was what you heard. Today we have screenagers, whether they're 5 years old or whether they're 80 years old.
Wait, can you say that again?
Screenagers.
Screenagers.
Right? And it's not based on a year. You know, we've seen people go from reading to scrolling and from writing to texting as a norm. And the speed of the time that you're able to say, well, we can actually make culture be helpful in health. You need teachings, you need a process, you need tools to be able to make that happen to a growing population that's going to completely look at music as being something that they see with their eyes first. And then they have style, sight, and then sound might come way down the line of what they listen to, because they listen with their eyes. And technology has led that since 2006 with the smartphone. So with these personalized computers on every hip and in every face, and y'all see it, I'm not making anything up, young people who are coming in have new ways to absorb what they think is going to fill their time. And everything's going to come through that pipeline. You need something that's able to define to them with the speed of a beat how they could come up and have an antidote to that what they might be screaming out as a sickness. And this was in the initial designs that had me interested in hip-hop public health, because when I first got involved with you guys, we've seen the advent of this new existence coming in to new gens meaning new generations to come.
Yep.
And here we are in 2025. We're not in 2024 anymore, people. It's 6 months ahead, because corporate businesses want to be able to always seize that mind, body, and that soul with sight, sound, story, and style, which we used to call whatever. We used to just call it music. Now it's expanded. So hip-hop public health is right on it for being that provider of an understanding or overstanding, not for what is, but what is to come the rest of this decade. It's serious. It's a serious convergence right now. So I'm just not up here as a rapper that you might have grew up with. I come from a period that, like I said, I come from studying technology, design, imagery in the 1980s. I've been around a long time. I decided to put it in rap because rap's technical bite at that particular time intrigued me. I was not a musician. I was kind of like a tech kid that was an artist and a designer. Those three came together, and I still love to rap with a funky beat, so that just added on to it. Yeah.
Dare I say, let's get down to business. Mental self-defensive fitness, right? From Fight the Power 35 years ago, it is such a great way to set up this next part of what is possible. Self-defensive fitness, mental self-defensive fitness.
It's in the song. It says the things are going to be coming at you at faster speeds. It's very key to overstand, and a collective can withstand a barrage of information coming at the average mind quicker than the individual could figure it out.
Yeah. Jide, can you talk a little bit about, we've been talking a lot about music. We also like to talk about the sort of multisensory approach, but what are some of the other areas that we know are proven to be effective in terms of combating toxic stress?
I mean, I always believe that we have to focus on our children. We have to really invest in the healthfulness of our children. So adverse childhood experiences, we know that children who come from certain backgrounds have more ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and we know that these adverse childhood experiences put you at much higher risk for chronic diseases, whether it's heart disease, stroke, cancer, whether it's maladaptive behaviors and psychiatric illness. That pediatric period is critically important. And we also know that the very fundamental primordial treatments for these adverse childhood experience can really be broken down into 6 things. It's nutrition, it's physical activity, it's sleep. Think about sleep for a second, and the relationship between sleep and social media. It's mindfulness, it's healthy relationships, and it's talk therapy. Right? What we're doing at Hip Hop Public Health, Lori, as you know, is we're taking those 6 primordial or primordial kind of preventative approaches that can help mitigate these ACEs, and we're developing tools and resources around all of them, like our Healthy Relationships resource. So I truly believe, it was Frederick Douglass that said it's easier to build up a child than to repair an adult. But we have to invest in building up the child's mind, not just the child's body and academic and intellectual, skill sets, but just the basic pillars of mental health. And that begins with combating these ACEs that our children, especially those in certain communities, are suffering from. And so, I really think that focus on early childhood development with these resources is critical.
Jimmie, can you share a little bit from your perspective? So how do you see it from like the philanthropic side of the street, from the social innovation side of the street, like the importance of investing in these areas of, say, innovation, like sleep, music, movement?
I think, excuse me, I think the return on investment, so to speak, in this case, may be a little bit different than what folks are used to talking about here at SOCAP, because essentially what you're talking about is, among other things, interrupting intergenerational trauma and ill health. You're talking about elevating or amplifying child and youth health, and in turn, family health, because as you all have iterated, and I encourage the audience to explore more, the youth who are exposed to the programming, who take part in engaging with the ambassadors, the teachers who use the curricula and the tools that you all have created in their classrooms around the world, those young people, in turn, increase the behavioral health of their families, their siblings, their parents.
Yeah.
Can you child-mediated health communication?
Exactly, child-mediated health communication. I mean, I've heard the stories, talked to some of the people who have benefited from your programming and recognizing, risk of stroke or diabetes in their loved ones, their grandparents, their parents. And I think, the consequences of that are higher academic achievement, ultimately, economic empowerment. If people are able to, take care of their health, maintain their health, and work longer, accelerate or rise in their jobs, that benefits the entire community. And I think in particular in this moment, and Chuck alluded to it, earlier, but particularly in this moment where we have so many potential stressors on our psyches.
Yes.
Technological, social, economic, so many external stressors that disrupt our physical and mental well-beings. And I said this before, and Chuck and Jide eloquently, refined it, but I think that this framework of HHPH and the leveraging the power of hip hop culture really brings people into community. We talk a lot in this society about the so-called crisis of boyhood. We talk about, the crisis of suicide, of trauma, the overdose crisis. And these are things, again, Chuck and Gita can speak about this much more than I can, that have always been discussed in hip hop. It's going back to the 70s and 80s. It's always been talked about. These ills that have affected our communities.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes you wonder how I keep them going on.
The message, exactly. Very much the flash.
Can you say that again?
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes you wonder how I keep them going under.
Yeah. Does anyone know that? Yeah.
It's from the message. I'd like to just add in what Doc was saying. It's like having the tools and a core organization that is embedded in education to provide this for a young generation. How young is young? I feel that it should be accessible after that from 13 to 30. Because I consider any people under 30 right now are young and are the youth. And culture has swayed that area of age into that area that we talk about today. But they should know that the tools are second nature and accessible in here for them to use against anything that's out there. But they should be provided in an organizational, structural tool and educational and teaching situation. And that's why hip hop public health is, to me, has the greatest design, because it becomes organic after a certain point.
Organic.
Yeah, it was second nature.
Yeah.
People nod their head like this is a feeling, it's second nature. You wasn't really taught that, but you kind of learned it somewhere along the way. This is how the antidote works. It has to be supported.
We tracked some of our kids that started with us back in 2006, and we followed them. It's a cohort study, and we followed them over the last 15, 16 years. And what was shocking was how many of them went into the healthcare professions. How many of them went into medical school. I actually met some pre-med students who were in a fifth grade class, hip hop public health class. Because of the class, they were now pre-med students. I interviewed a research coordinator for one of my studies, and I hired her, and she told me after the interview
after you hired her,
that she was in a hip hop public health class. And I was like, you should have told me that before. I wouldn't have done the interview. But we've seen so many kids, and so there's a secondary effect. Even though our goal is a public health goal and it's a health goal, we're seeing a very powerful secondary effect on their career trajectories, just by exposing them to this positive toolkits as kids in their public schools.
If I may add something quickly, Lori, I mean, I think for with my Skoll Foundation hat on, parallel to my ally hat, I think for me that's what the initial power of what was so innovative about this in particular, that it wasn't just getting people like Chuck or Dougie or DMC or Ashanti or whoever getting on stage talking about how great this program was, or being ambassadors for hip hop and for the culture, but the fact that you asked about bias before, Lori. Bias because you're using hip hop and hip hop's in the name, but the fact that NIH supported, CDC supported, GDA worked with Michelle Obama when Obama was in the White House. There's these longitudinal studies. The research was solid. Study after study after study. Everything that you all do, you write about it in peer-reviewed journals. It's vetted. It's credentialed. And so, what I've always said to people, philanthropic counterparts or folks in general, is that, this is not just entertainment and make you feel good in the audience. It's like, it's that, and this is serious. This is science, evidence-based.
Yes.
This is impact-based, and the research is there to prove that this model over time, over 10, 15 years, that's a generation. You're seeing generational impact.
Well, and I feel like there's so much more to say, and I feel like I've done a failed job as a moderator, as we have like a couple of minutes left and we have these incredible questions. You know, to be able to think about, yes, the work that Hip Hop Public Health does, and you know, the organizations that you might come in contact with that are thinking about music, that are thinking about movement, that are using the arts and harnessing it for healing, you know, support them. Think about that in a way that ROI could mean so much more. We are going to be sticking around a little bit outside so we can talk about some more of the questions, but there is one question that I kind of want to get to, and then it's going to wrap up this session. Question was, so what are some of the types of health topics and health literacy areas that, you know, you use music for in Hip Hop Public Health? And funny enough, we have a little video to show you that goes along with that. So why don't we roll that video? And I want to thank everyone here for joining me up here on the stage. Can we give a nice round of applause for this unbelievable panel? This does not happen every day. And give you a little taste of Hip Hop Public Health in action.
Now if he don't sound right, then he's doing the show. Sway when he walks, then he's doing the show. Slur when he's talk, then he's doing the show. Call 911, cause it ain't no joke. Now F is for the face, and A is for the arms. F is for the speech, and T is for the time. Time to do what? Call 911. Time to do what? Call 911.
Let's talk about soul, baby. Let's talk about MSG. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that we eat. Let's talk about salt. Let's talk about salt. Let's talk about salt. Let's talk about salt.
I got the vaccine, you got the vaccine, they got the vaccine, we got the vaccine. We could get back to normal, let me inform you, let's all get the vaccine. It's about community immunity. I'm talking unity for you and me. If Doc says it's good, then trust me, it's good. Now let's all get the vaccine. Wash your hands, everybody, and everybody, wash your hands. 20 seconds. Come on, wash your hands, everybody, and everybody. Wash your hands. My people uptown, wash your hands. My people downtown, wash your hands. People from the East Coast, wash your hands. People from the West Coast, wash your hands.
I suggest you talk to your family, your inner circle, and screaming and proactive, and it won't hurt you. We all want to live our lives the best we could be. Go check your colon. Peace, I'm Chuck D. Save lives, and peep the deeper meaning of the cancer. And get a screening. Save lives, take control of your health. Get knowledge for yourself, and it's the real wealth.
I've been hiding in the shadows from the kids and all the babies. It's amazing, they go crazy, and the kids will always trade me in the salad dressing, ice cream, and the muffins too. You can choose any topping, and I'm there for you. Get your burgers and fries from Burgerland. I'm the villain that's hiding in the soda can. Hide and seek, peek the fool, I made a fool of you. It's true, I'm very proud of what I do to you. I got 99 names and little sugar's just one.
Yeah, I like to also mention that, you extend to your community to be able to get the point across as quick as possible if you can't figure it out. And I got one of the co-writers on the colon cancer song, Tormund Jahi, that's out there, and he actually teaches young people, young kings in this Bay Area. Where you at, Jahi? Co-writer, there you go. Yeah, when he penned the colon cancer song to be very relevant, because 3 days ago we lost one of the great pioneers, DJ Clark Kent, of colon cancer. So these things are very relevant in everybody's lives, people's families, and we think that we could be informative and get ahead of the situation, and that's why Hip Hop Public Health, there's none better.